Hi everyone, it's Stephen here. For property investors, owning a HMO may seem like the holy grail. This is the cash cow that's going to keep on giving you. Owning a few of these and you could be financially free. This is a lot of what property investors believe and tell themselves when they get into HMOs. And for some, it's probably definitely true. But with that cash cow, there comes stricter and more regulations that you need to comply with compared to your traditional long-term rental property. And you may have seen in the headlines all different HMO landlords being fined for all different things to do with how they operate and run their HMO. For example, this landlord in central Brighton's been fined £13,600 for not providing a fire detection and alarm system, among other defects. Brighton and Hove Council have around 4,000 HMOs. An HMO, if you don't know, is a houses of multiple occupancy. Now they've put in place stricter regulations and additional requirements around HMOs so that they don't get a build-up of HMOs in one particular area. Another landlord, Mr. Gibbons in Preston, was fined 24 grand and had to repay tenants £47,000 in rent for failing to carry out improvements to their property and running an unlicensed HMO. He has also been added to the nationwide database of rogue landlords. Because of this, 13 former tenants then brought rent applications before the first tier tribunal in respect of Mr. Gibbons' failings. Those claims resulted in an order to pay back the rent to those tenants that totalled £46,908. Not surprisingly, these types of fines and regulations will put property investors off. So that's why it's important that we discuss what you need to do to become a HMO landlord, the benefits of being one, and the regulations that you need to follow, the risks of owning them, and how you can manage those risks and stay on the right side of the law to avoid costly mistakes and becoming another news headline. In England, there's estimated to be 497,000 HMOs, according to the Ministry of Housing, with London having the most HMOs of 184,000. Then that's followed by Birmingham with 29,000 and then Manchester with 23,000. HMO stands for House in Multiple Occupation and is generally used to describe a situation where there's multiple people renting a property who share living accommodation but are not part of the same family. The property is split into individual rooms, each serving as a unit of accommodation. It will be occupied by 3 or more people who do not form a single household. They pay rent and they share basic facilities at the property, such as the kitchen, a toilet and a bathroom. So let's talk about the benefits briefly of owning HMO, which get people excited. So the benefit of HMO is that you're renting out individual rooms within a property. So let's say you've got a 3-bedroom house. So you've got 3 bedrooms upstairs, a bathroom upstairs maybe, and downstairs you've got a living room, a dining room, and a kitchen, and maybe a downstairs toilet. So what people would then generally do to manufacture an HMO from that single family home is to turn one of the reception rooms downstairs into another bedroom. And then you can rent that room out individually as well, and then share the kitchen facilities and share the dining room, share the bathroom and share the toilet. So as an example, you can find this place in Reading that's renting for £3,300 per calendar month, and it's a 7-bedroom property, and they're renting it out as £108 per person per week. And it's really essentially for students as it's close to the university. It's fully furnished and there's a shared kitchen, a shared living space, and a couple of bathrooms. Whereas in a similar area, we could compare it to this property that's a 4-bedroom house, same number of stories. They've just got it advertised as a single family home on a long-term rental, and they've got this one up at £1,900. So you can see by turning some of the living spaces into additional bedrooms, you can generate a lot more cash flow on a similar size footprint. And by renting by the room, it also allows you to mitigate vacancy rates, because if you're renting room by room and you've got a tenancy agreement for one room and a tenancy agreement for another one, and say you've got 5 separate tenancy agreements in, say, a 5-room HMO, then if one person leaves, you're still generating money from the other 4 rooms while you look for someone else to take the rental in that one that's gone vacant. Because HMOs generate a lot of cash flow, other investors are going to look at that property and see that as a good investment. So when it comes time that you want to sell your HMO for whatever reason, you might be able to report that you're getting a 9% yield or a 10% yield, and therefore another investor would pay a premium price for that particular property if it's got good rental history and has been performing well for a number of years, that you can show that as part of the sale. And therefore you could achieve for that property a higher value for it compared to another property that's just been owner occupied or is not a HMO. There's a fair few cons with owning HMOs, so let's get into them and assess each one. Most experienced property investors will tell you, and I've had more tenants than I can remember, that the more tenants you have, the more aggravation you're going to get. And there's a formula that I like to work on that will tell me how much aggravation am I going to get from this particular property. And it goes something like this. So the number of tenants divided by the number of properties will give you your aggravation level. Now, if that aggravation level is above 1, you need to start worrying, because ultimately it means you've got more aggravation. That aggravation, the higher that aggravation level is, the more aggravation you're going to be getting. And with HMOs, if we go, we've got 5 tenants to 1 property, your aggravation level's 5. If you've got that one that's 7-bed, 1 to 1 property, your aggravation level's 7. The higher the aggravation level, the older you'll get sooner than you want to be. Just look at me, I'm only 26. So let's talk about licensing. Now, all HMOs need a license if there's 5 or more people in the property from 2 different families. And it can be as low as even 3 people in the property. You can check the requirements on the local council's website to determine what the license requirements are based on the number of people you're going to be having at the HMO or the HMO that you're looking at. If you're running a HMO and you do not have a license, you're likely to get fined like these unwitting landlords that think they can get away with it. And just as bad, if the tenants find out, you're likely that you could get a rent repayment order and have to pay rent back up to the last 12 months. There are 3 types of licensing. There's mandatory licensing, which means if your property meets the criteria, you have to get a license for it. Additional licensing, this is where the local council require landlords who operate a HMO that's smaller than the mandatory licensing to get a license for it. For example, a 3-bedroom HMO. And then the selective licensing, this is where the local councils require all landlords to get a license for any property that they rent out based on the area that they've got the property. Check with the local council to see what the requirements are for a HMO license in that particular area to determine whether it's a mandatory license or it's an additional license that you're required based on the number of bedrooms that the HMO has got. And HMO's licenses last for a maximum of 5 years. So some can be less than that. So if you're buying a HMO, you need to check how long that license lasts for, and it might be that it's up for renewal. This landlord was fined £14,000 for operating without an HMO licence and safety breaches. There's minimum room sizes for HMOs, and these depend on various factors. The number of people living at the property and the number of people that are going to be using certain facilities like the living space. So a single bedroom for an adult is 70 square feet. A double bedroom for 2 adults is 110 square feet, and a room for a child under the age of 10 is 50 square feet. Some local authorities have introduced more stringent room size requirements for HMOs, so it's important that you go and check with the local council in the area that if you're looking at potentially buying a HMO to make sure it's compliant. Should be if it's got a license, but if you're looking at turning a property into a HMO, these are the types of things you need to be checking to make sure that the property is going to be fit for purpose. For example, in Brighton Hove, the local council there have produced a standards booklet that goes into detail about what the minimum size facilities should be in rooms like the bathrooms, the kitchens, dining rooms, based on the number of occupants that are going to be living at the property. Additionally, the minimum room sizes only relate to HMOs that have to have a license. So if your HMO doesn't need a license because it's of a certain size, then you don't need to worry about the minimum room standards. Landlords who fail to meet these minimum room standards can also be fined, just like this landlord that was fined £40,700 for various issues, including 2 of the rooms were too small to meet the HMO room size regulations. All occupants of a HMO should be able to leave the property safely in the event of a fire. Measures must be put in place to prevent the spread of fire and smoke to living areas or escape routes before the occupants have been able to exit the building. There must be adequate warning systems to help ensure occupants receive warning of a fire so they can make their escape before the escape route becomes impassable. Fire doors are required on every bedroom, in living spaces and in kitchens. All doors leading to an escape route must have fire doors on them, but you don't need them on bathrooms or toilets. It's also important that you carry out a fire risk assessment on your property, and this is meant to be done every year, and you should keep a log of every time that you do this fire risk assessment, because essentially it's up to you to do it. No one checks on this type of thing, but you need to keep a log, because if the council asks for it, they'll ask for the log of what you've been doing, and you will then be able to say these are the times and dates when the fire risk assessment was carried out and what the result of it was. It's also required that for every 5 occupants there's also 1 kitchen and a bathroom made available for those people to share. If you want to convert a house into HMO, it's likely that there's going to be Article 4 directions put in place by the local council to stop people from getting permitted development rights to convert a normal house into a HMO. Where there is Article 4 directions in place, it means that you then have to go through full planning, and they do full planning to assess then what the impact of that HMO would be in that local area. For example, in Brighton and Hove, they require that there's fewer than 20% HMOs in that area. And it doesn't result in a normal house being sandwiched between 2 HMOs, and it doesn't lead to a continuous frontage of 3 or more HMOs immediately adjacent to each other, and that communal living spaces like cooking and bathroom facilities are appropriate for the size and the expected number of occupants. So there's also tenant problems, and tenants living in close proximity to each other can potentially lead to all types of problems with antisocial behaviour. And this antisocial behaviour impacts on other tenants' quality of life and the area around that property. And it's the landlord's responsibility to combat and prevent this antisocial behaviour. Landlords are also responsible for ensuring that the waste from the property is stored, collected and disposed of properly. That there's enough bins and there's a place to store the bins that are required for the number of tenants at that particular property. And I mentioned earlier about rent repayment orders, and this becomes a big problem when tenants catch on to the fact that they can potentially get their rent paid back to them because they've been renting in an unlicensed HMO. And what this means is that they then can apply to a first tribunal hearing and get their rent paid back for up to 12 months. And there's lots of fines that have been happening about this type of thing. And there's lawyers that specialise out there in making sure that there's no win, no fee for rent repayment orders against unlicensed HMOs. And the other bad thing about unlicensed HMOs is that you as a landlord cannot evict any tenants while your property remains an unlicensed HMO, and you have to go through an application process with the council, which can take months to get the HMO licensed, and it might be that they won't give you a license and they find other things wrong with that HMO. Probably would do if you've got an unlicensed HMO. So HMOs are a great way to achieve a higher rental return than you could get from just a single family traditional long-term rental. They're not for the faint-hearted, and there's no doubt that you'll get more aggravation with them because more tenants equals more aggravation. But if you're happy that the gain is going to outweigh the pain, just make sure that you comply with the regulations, and in this way you'll make sure that your life and the tenant's life is going to be a happy one. If you're more into single family homes and you want to buy properties that need fixing up so you can fix them up and then pull your money back out and then build a profitable portfolio over a period of time, I'm pulling together some detailed training on exactly how you can do that. At the moment, I've got a waitlist available where you can click the link in the description and get on that waitlist, or the link that I'm putting on the screen here, and then you'll be one of the first to know when that's ready. In the meantime, if you haven't seen this video, go and check this video out, as that explains the approach that's going to be around that training and that strategy. So thanks very much for watching. I really do appreciate it, and I'll see you next time.